Because if we can understand how serious it was for them, then when we come to the covenant that we're under and we see that God says, this is even more serious. Because what was the blood of the old covenant ratified with? Animals. What's the blood of the new covenant ratified with? You think he's going to take that more seriously? All right, so let's look at what's going on here. And I want to try to lay it out this way so we can maybe kind of make sense of all of this. Let's think of it as the covenant's being offered. And in chapter 19, you have God say, hey, you see what kind of God I am. You see what I did to the Egyptians, how I rescued you, how I bore you on eagle's wings. What do you think about making a covenant with me? What would you say? Good deal. All right, so here's what the covenant is going to be based upon. I will be your God. And everybody goes, yay, we want Jehovah as our God because we've seen how strong he is. Now, you will be my people. Yeah, we want to be your people. That's great. All right, so what's involved in that is you are going to have to be obedient. If you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you'll be a special treasure to me. And what do all the people say? We will obey. If obedience is what you want, we have no problem with that. Sign us up. We agree. We will obey. All right, so this is the proposal. Chapter 19 is the proposal. God says, are you interested in making a covenant with me? Yes, we are. That means you're going to have to obey. No problem. We're fine with that. Okay. Now, God doesn't immediately make the covenant with them. Just because they say, yeah, we like that idea, go for it. God says, no, you need to understand a little bit more what's going to be involved in this. I want you to really think about it. I want you to really count the cost. In 3 days, I'm going to appear to you and I'm going to speak to you. So be prepared for that. Were they prepared for it? They did what God said. They marked off the mountain. They sanctified themselves. But when God appeared on the mountain, it was overwhelming. And the mountain quaked and a sound of a trumpet blared, and thick smoke boiled up, and the Lord descended down upon the mountain in fire, and the people were scared to death, and then God spoke. So this is stage 2. First stage is, are you interested in the covenant? Yes, we are. Stage 2 is, let's get a basic outline of what I mean when I say you're going to have to obey me. And so what you have in chapter 20 that we normally call the 10 Commandments is a skeleton outline of the terms that they're going to have to obey if they're going to keep the covenant. So you shall have no other gods before me, no images. You have to reverence my name, cannot take it in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not covet. All right. This would not be all of the terms. This is just a rough outline of the terms. And the people at this point say, okay, don't let God talk to us anymore. We can't handle that and live. They were literally thought they were going to die in this process. But they say to Moses, listen, you go to God and let God speak to you, and you come and tell us what he says, and we will hear you. We can survive that, but we can't survive him speaking directly to us. Now, this fear, I think we mentioned in chapter 20 in verse 20, Moses said, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. He's saying, don't worry about losing your life necessarily just because he speaks to you. But he came to you and he presented himself in this way so that you could have a reverence for him. What's this covenant based upon? Obedience. What does it take to obey? Respect.
And also to obey his commandments.
Yes. So they have to have the respect there if they're going to be obedient to these commandments, which is how they're going to keep this covenant. So I want to look at something. Hold your place there in Exodus 20 and flip over to Deuteronomy chapter 5. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, this is 40 years later. 40 years after the events we're talking about right now in class, Moses goes back and he says, you remember what took place 40 years ago? Do you remember that day when God spoke to you on the mountain and he gave you the 10 Commandments and he was offering the terms of this covenant? And he recounts this, and he says, remember how afraid you were? Here's what the Lord said to me on that day. Verse 28 of Deuteronomy chapter 5. Then the Lord heard the voice of the words when you spoke to me, and the Lord said, I have heard the voice of the words of this people which they have spoken to you. They are right in all that they have spoken. Oh, that they had such a heart in them, that they would fear me and always keep all of my commandments. Why? That it may be well with them. That it may be well with them. Here's what God knows. If they will obey, it will go well with them. Why does God give commandments? So that it'll be well with us. Flip over since you're right there in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 24. For the Lord commanded us to observe all of these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that He might preserve us alive. God says, boy, if they would just always have this level of respect and reverence, then they would be obedient and things would go so well for them. And that's exactly right. When we have instruction, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear the Lord and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. This is man's all. That reverence for God is what will steer us away from temptation. And overcoming temptation is what will give us the victory. That's what's in our best interest. God says, that's what I want for them. That's the reason I appeared to them. Now, I'm making a covenant with you, and this covenant is based upon obedience. Yes, we will obey. All right, here's some of the things that you're going to have to obey. This is just kind of a rough outline of the things you're going to have to obey. Yes, we will do that. We will hear that. God still hasn't made the covenant with them at this point. So now what God's going to do is He's going to say, all right, you say you want to do this. You say you have the proper respect for me to do this. Now let me give you more details of what's going to be involved in these terms. Now, this threefold process, He doesn't rush into this. The people, I think, are willing to rush into this and say, yeah, we'll sign us up for that. God said, no, not yet. I want you to consider this a little bit more. So what we have in chapters 21 through 23 are more details of the terms of this covenant. So when you think of the Ten Commandments, sometimes people think of the Ten Commandments and they think of this and they say, okay, this is the covenant. Well, yeah, it is. It becomes symbolic of the covenant. It becomes representative of the covenant. Other people look at the Ten Commandments and say, well, actually the Ten Commandments were God's laws for all people of all times, and then what you have in 20 through 23 are details for the Jews only. No. What you have is you have the Ten Commandments representing the covenant that God's going to make. 21 through 23, you have more details. In other words, let's look at the finer print here. There's no fine print, though. God makes sure everybody understands what's on the table. But that's just more details and more parts of this covenant. God really wants them to get what they're signing up for here. All right, any thoughts, any comments or questions before we get into the latter part of chapter 20 and through 23?
I believe that the reason when God actually just spoke in the outline that you showed, I think that the reason they went to Moses and told him, we don't want to be taught from God no more. Let Him talk to you and then you convey them to me. I believe that in that list of 10, when He spoke to them, since word is sharper than a two-edged sword, I believe different ones actually had violated different items of that through their lifetime, and it pierced them so bad that they thought that because they had done that they was going to die. Even that it goes into this other part telling how they can prolong their sins, roll it forward by the offerings. At that time, I believe that they didn't. Well, we know now that when we get 21 through 23, that they didn't have no out from the things that if they had committed, that that's going to die. That's my gist of what I get, that the fear was so bad with them from hearing God's word. Because, even when you're told a sin that you committed, I mean, it really gets to you. But if you talk about sin that don't have nothing to do with me.
Right.
I mean, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same thing that happened to
Well,
the Israelites.
yeah. I don't doubt that just like if you read the Ten Commandments to us today, how many of you could say, I've never broken any of those 10 commandments? Anybody in here never lied? Raise your hand.
Every man is sin. Nobody
That's right.
sins.
That's exactly right.
But don't you think at this moment they're just overwhelmed?
Yeah.
Right now they're just horrified.
Yeah.
What they're seeing because they're like, now this is not what we signed up for right here. This is coming at us.
Our God is a consuming fire. Yes.
So you go deal with that. Don't tell us.
That's right. Yeah. All right. So one other point, and then we'll get into the text. I want us, as we go through this, to think about that here we are as the children of Israel. We're excited because we're going to get to be God's special people. He's going to be our God and take care of us. And He's offering us this covenant. And He's saying, all right, now listen to me. Listen to these things that I'm telling you. Are you willing to do these? And I want you to think about how you would feel about entering into a covenant saying, I promise to obey these rules. All right? So let's look at that. Anything you want to say as we get into the new material?
No. Talking about I doubt anybody was sitting around contemplating, like you said the other day, doing any of these things at this moment. They are totally focused on not aggravating and making God mad at this point. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, they cried for Him to deliver them, and now that He has, they don't know what to do or what's He looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, good point.
And Moses, a couple stories back, Moses was having to be a judge and relay to them the Lord's will in this situation, And tonight, we're probably going to take care of a lot of those potential situations that were coming to Moses that he was having to deal with. We got about 100 ifs tonight, if this happens and if this happens. So I'm going to sort through some of the more precise situations, I guess, that they may encounter.
And really, all of these fall under those 10 commandments. They fit into that outline. So the first thing deals with worship, laws concerning worship to God. And in 22, I'm in chapter 20, 22 through the end of the chapter there's some instruction given about offering sacrifices to the Lord. And first of all, he reiterates in verse 23, you shall not make anything to be with me, gods of gold or gods of silver. So no idols. When you worship, even if you are worshiping me, do not don't make any image to worship. That's not how you worship me. You don't worship me by making some visible, tangible thing to bow down to, even if you're claiming it's me. By the way, what does Aaron say when he makes the golden calves? Okay, but what does he say they are, the calf is? This is the God who brought you out. All right, so I don't know that he was saying, here's a different God, calls him, a different name. He's saying, no, this is Jehovah. And God says, that's what I don't want. I don't want you ascribing something to me. And it's, yes, that's right. That's right. That's what they're used to. That's what their culture has always taught them that worship is. God says, that's not the way you're going to worship me. And then he talks about the altars that they are to build. And what are the altars to be made out of? Earth. And I suppose that could just be dirt or it can be stones, but it can't be stones that what? Yes, that have been hewn with a human tool. God says that'll be polluted. All right, now I want to stop right here and just ask you, do you think it's that big of a deal if you have cut a stone with a chisel and used it as an altar? God said so. That's exactly right. Does that make sense to you, though? Does that make sense that somehow by using an iron chisel on something, it's polluted it and therefore it's no longer suitable to be worshipped? And it doesn't make sense to me either. So here's what I want us to think about as we go through here. We're listening to these laws. Some of these laws are going to make really good sense to us and we're going to say, that's a great law. Some of these laws we're going to say, that's silly. I don't understand the point of that. what do you do when you're making a covenant with God and some of His laws you agree with and some of His laws you think, I don't see why that's a big deal. And then that's right. And then maybe some of the laws you disagree with. I think there'll be some laws in here that I would disagree with. But I've got to decide, do I want to make a covenant with God or do I want to, no, I'm going to do it my way. And so that's what will be under consideration as we go through.
Things that you have to realize that they did, Moses did. Being the Almighty God, His ways is higher than our ways. We can't even comprehend to even think what He knows and does. And I mean, bringing stuff out of nothing to what we have today, but like the rock. It was purposely that nothing was it's just supposed to be a rock that you just took up and nothing used against it with a tool. Because that's the way He wanted it.
That's right. And I like the way you said that. That's the way He wanted it done. I don't have to understand it. He may never explain it to me. And so, but that's okay. That's okay because He's God. And do I have the faith to trust that we're going to play by His rules if we're going to make a covenant with Him? And the reason I point this out is guess what? What do you find in the new covenant? Laws that you agree with, laws that you look at and say, I don't see that's a big deal. And then sometimes there's laws that you say, I don't like that one. That's not the way that what do you do with that? How do you handle that? And I think if we can see it kind of with a covenant that we're not part of, it'll help us to see it with the covenant that we are. All right, anything else you want to mention through verse 26?
Maybe the only thing on that, I don't know about the hinged stone, but the focus was not, he didn't want any of the altar itself to be getting too much of the focus and preparing it. It was what you're doing there that was getting the focus. It wasn't that the altar was special or anything there special. It was just the focus was what was being done. Just be careful how you worship. Don't get off into more of the ceremonial stuff or the offering there is the focus, not how nice the altar is.
Good point. Good point. All right, into chapter 21, we start to look at the treatment of, and I use the word slaves here because I felt like that would be maybe more, how does that strike your mind? God has laws about the treatment of slaves. In your thinking right now, what would you think the law would be? No slaves. Don't have slaves. All right, is that what the law is? Okay, so here may be the first place that to our thinking we start looking at and say, I don't know if I like these rules or not. And what are we going to do with that if we don't like the rules here? So just going through this kind of, again, we've got a lot to cover tonight because we really would like to get through chapter 23. So we're going to summarize a lot of this. If you buy a Hebrew servant, how long is he supposed to serve? And then what happens after that? You let him go. You let him go. All right. Now, how do you feel about the you can own him for 6 years part? You like that or you don't? All right. If you're the slave owner, you might like that. Okay. If you're the slave, you probably don't like that a whole lot. What about the part letting him go at the next year? Yeah, probably opposite. If you're the slave, you're thinking, I'm really glad that's in place. If you're the slave owner, you may say, well, that's not the great deal for me at this point. Whatever your view is about slavery or whatever, what you have is you're going to have some people here that don't like the rule the way that God set it up, others that do like the rule the way that God set it up, and we just have to deal with the fact that's the way God set it up. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I would say, particularly in a culture where slavery was common and there were no rights for slaves, that what you would have here is a very generous law towards slavery. And now from a culture that we don't have slaves, although we do have slaves, we just call them different things and have different rules in place for them. But really a Hebrew slave, the way he was sold is because he was sold as an employee, basically. You just worked 24/7 for 6 years. And it was basically what it was. But he's setting regulations here. Now, here's one that I look at and I think, okay, I don't know if this makes sense to me. If you have a Hebrew slave and he's married, when he comes into your service, he serves you for 6 years, and it's time for him to be released. Do you get to keep his wife? No. Now, what if he comes single, and while the time he's there, you see that he's married, and he has a wife and he has kids, and then it's time for him to leave? What does the law say? That's right, they stay. Okay, now see, here's one where I go, Lonnie doesn't like that one. Lonnie doesn't like that one. What would Lonnie do if Lonnie's there and God says, all right, here's the agreement. You're going to have to follow and obey these laws. And here's a law that I look at and go, I don't like that law. Do I raise my hand and say, can we have an amendment to this? Can we talk about scratching this one out and changing it?
You can stay a slave and stay there with your family, because that's what it says in the next verse.
Yeah, but I'm talking about agreeing with the covenant here. If I'm talking about agreeing with the covenant. Do you see what the point that I'm trying to make is? Is that when we come to looking at the covenant that God's making with us, it's not a covenant where we get to say, okay, God, I hear what you're saying there, but I'm really not willing to sign off on that. If we can change this to where I'm satisfied with it, then, and I think that's what a lot of people want to do when they make a covenant with God. They want to come to the table and say, okay, God, let's talk about this salvation thing. I'm all on board with that. When we talk about these other things, your laws concerning, some of the tough ones, marriage, divorce, and remarriage, or something else, unless we can amend that, I just don't think I can agree with that. We can't pick and choose. That's right. And so even with this covenant, we may look at it and say, I don't know if I like this one. But that's not how it works. We've got to say, am I willing to make this covenant with God, even with some of the laws that I don't personally like? And so, all right. So maybe I've made my point on that, and I won't have to keep continuing to do that. Anything else you want to mention about the laws concerning servants here?
No, I don't believe you're going there.
Steve was trying to make the point, but he was getting off of my point, so I didn't let him. But the point that you were making is there was a provision that if a servant could say, you know what, I don't want to be released at year 7, I want to continue to stay, and he could sign up to basically be a servant for the rest of his life in that situation, in serving. And so that was a possibility there. There was instruction about if a man sells his daughter to be a maidservant. And really what seems to be under consideration here was more than just she's becoming a servant. She's becoming either the man or the man's son's wife. Because you notice in verse 10, the way the New King James says that if he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food. And what this is saying is here is one that is brought into the family as a servant, but becomes a wife, in that she can't be viewed as a secondary wife just because she's a servant. And so her marital rights remain the same. And that would be something that I think would be unheard of in the ancient world. That here is one that was a servant that became a wife, but she's not a secondary wife. No, she's a true wife. And she has the true rights of a wife. And if something changes on that, you can't diminish that with her. All right, anything else you'd like to point out through verse 11 of chapter 21? Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. All right, and then there's a section about personal injury. And I think that probably a lot of this we would look at and we would agree with. Some of it we would probably disagree with. And I've got one that I want to point out, something that, depending on how it's translated, seems to change the concept of it a little bit. If a man strikes a man so that he dies, what's the penalty? That's right. But this is premeditated murder here. In other words, he's trying to kill this man. That's what happened. Now, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him into his hand, in other words, this was accidentally, he accidentally killed someone, then he's not guilty of murder. God said, I'll appoint a place where he can flee, and we'll see later on that allows a court process to handle this, to see whether he's really innocent or guilty in that. But provisions are made for that. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor, he's going to have to die. Well, what about if everybody agrees, well, let's not put him to death? In other words, can we do that? Can we say, well, he killed somebody, but I don't hold a grudge. I don't think he should be put to death. And everybody says, okay, we'll just let it go.
I think a lot of this comes into play from what Cain did to Abel. I mean, God already seen what actually in the garden of Cain actually killing Abel, premeditated, murdering him. And then he's reassuring it again in these commandments that if you kill somebody, deliberately just go out to kill them, you're to be put to death. But he's given a way of escape on the part if it was an accident. And I want to say that there were cities set out later on that we learn about before, if something like it come, you could flee to it, but then you still had to go before the elders, and they had to listen to the witnesses and decide through the law whether he was guilty.
So the point that I want to make with this is that as God establishes these are not where man can say, well, that seems a little harsh to us. We'll take a different view here. No, God was establishing what the punishment would be. If one strikes his father or mother, what was the penalty? Death. All right. So when God said, honor your father and mother as one of the 10 commandments, he was serious about it, wasn't he? He said, look, that has the death penalty. I've thought about this. Can you imagine what a different society it would be if every parent in the United States of America knew that if someone saw their child strike them, that child would be put to death? Can you imagine how much effort would be placed into saying, now you cannot disrespect your mom and daddy. This will cost you your life. That would change things. That would radically change things. God had that in place for Israel. Yes, if he curses his father and mother, he shall surely be put to death. And what's the idea of cursing? Speak against, yes. Wish harm for, express anger. So, have you ever heard a child say to their mom and dad, I hate you? I think that would qualify. And that happens pretty frequently, doesn't it? And so if that would qualify, boy, we would be really serious about teaching our children. You just can't have outbursts of anger like that towards me or towards other authority figures even. That would change things in a society. It really would.
It changed the attitude of kids if they seen that many people killed off from just doing those things that he mentions in this terms of the covenant.
Yeah, that's right. Kidnapping, death penalty. Now, here's an interesting one. If men contend with each other and one strikes the other with a stone with his fist, and he does not die, but he's confined to his bed, and he rises again and goes outside, you would not be guilty in that case of murder. But you do have a responsibility there. You're to pay for his lost time and provide for him to be thoroughly healed. So you may not be accountable for murder, but you are accountable for the injury. And therefore, you're responsible for making up for that injury. Now, verse 20 is the one that I think, verse 20 and 21 are the ones that in the New King James are a struggle. If a man beats his servant or his maidservant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. That was something that wasn't typical in ancient culture. You wouldn't be punished for killing your servant because it's your property. And the term here that's going to be used is, yes, he's your property, but he's also a human life. And you are responsible for that. But then verse 21 is where the translation difference makes a difference. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive for a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. So in the King James, in the New King James, the way that I have read that before is that, okay, if you do this and he doesn't die and he stays alive for a couple of days, but then dies, well, he made it a couple of days, you're free. But anybody reading from a different version that words that differently? What does it say? If he remains for a day or two, or how is it worded? He survives? Okay. There's quite a few, probably about half of the versions say if he recovers after a day or two. Now that's different than if he survives for a day or two. And so, the word there really is, in the Hebrew, is not quite as clear. But most scholars, if you read most commentaries, no matter what version they're reading from, say that the idea is he recovers after a day or two. So he doesn't die because of the injuries. It's not the time difference, it's whether he recovers or not. And so if he recovers, then the person is not responsible for murder because the servant didn't die. And now, regardless, there's still some troubling thoughts in that, in my mind. And so again, this may be one of those laws where I look at it and say, well, that's not exactly how I would do it. And I would have to consider, well, am I still willing to make a covenant with God about this?
Well, do you think that ties into the part before where we were talking about the men fighting? And if one hurts the other one, but he doesn't die, he shall only pay for his loss of time. So it's saying that the owner don't have to pay for the loss of time because he owns it.
Yes, I think that's right. I think there's a parallel thought there in that. Good point. All right. Verse 22 and 23 gives some indication that if a pregnant woman is hurt in such a fight that would take place, and it causes her to give birth prematurely, what about the life of the child that is involved here? Is that viewed as a full-on human life or not? And what's the answer from the text here? It is. If that child should die, if harm should come to the mother or the child, guess what? Life for life. That's murder. All right? If no lasting harm comes, then that's not murder, but that person is still responsible for whatever penalties may be imposed there and determined by the judge. Any thoughts through that? Oh, verse 26 and 27. If a man strikes the eye of his servant or maidservant or knocks out his tooth, what happens? That's right. They go free for the sake of the tooth of the eye that they lost in that. So I think what God was trying to do is say, yes, you may have servants that work for you. They may be your property in the sense that you have bought them and they work for you, but they are human lives. And you can't just take that human life, and you're responsible even for the treatment of that human life, which we may still not like the sound of that, of them being property. But the fact is, in the ancient world, for anyone to say that slaves had rights and should be protected in that regard, it would be quite different from the laws around them. All right, moving on.
I think also what God's actually, through these, I guess you call it, identifying items being to a slave from a master, is that God wants to stress on to them that even though they're a slave, they're my creations.
Exactly.
And you are to respect a human, no matter whether it's a slave or free, and that if you do harm to him or her, or even a woman with child, they're all his creations, and if you violate one, there's a consequence for your actions when you do harm to the people.
Yep.
Did you already mention that? Like starting 28.
No.
Are you going to mention that now?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was my next section on the slide, but actually I'd included that in this previous section, and so I advanced the slide before I should. so still dealing with this idea of human life, the value of human life. If an ox gores a man or a woman so that it dies, what's to happen to that animal? Yeah, okay, it's to be killed. All right, it's to be killed. Can you eat it? No. And I think the point of that is to say this animal dies because it's guilty. And there's no redeeming profit that comes from this. This animal is being killed because it took human life. It took life that was created in the image of God. Now, there's responsibility to the owner of the ox if what?
You.
That's right. If I know that I've got a bull out there and that bull's mean and it's chased me around the pasture, I've warned my family not to get in the pasture with it because I know it's mean, and it gets out and then it kills my neighbor. Do I have a responsibility in that? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because I knew that animal was violent and I did nothing about it.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said he gets out of the fence. Would that apply here? Because it talks about you keep it in. So like if you try to keep it in and get out, would that make any difference?
Not from what I understand here, because the qualification that I see here is that you knew that it was a dangerous animal, and you did nothing about it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like if you put it in a fence, that's what it says here.
It says, yeah, he has not kept it confined. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you didn't do a
All
good
right.
enough job.
I see what
Didn't
you're
do a
saying.
good enough job keeping
I see what you're
away
saying.
from people
Yeah.
or whatever.
Well, I didn't keep it confined, so. I mean, I think that would be the case. Here's the thing. We have the same, if I have a pit bull and I've got it chained up in my yard, and I know if this animal should get off, it's going to attack somebody. And sure enough, one day it breaks its chain and gets off. Should I be held responsible for that? I tried to confine it, but I failed to confine it. I knew this. I knew this.
I guess then why wouldn't the law just be, if you know it's been trying to do this, just go ahead and stone it?
I think that is what's being said, and that if you don't, then you're going to be held accountable for it. And so I think that would be the natural conclusion of that is, hey, if we see an indication that we've got something that is going to be, before it gets to the point where they come and accuse me of murder, we need to take care of that. That guy needs to go. And then we could eat him. We could eat that ox then, but if it kills somebody, we can't eat it. Then but I do think that that's the idea. It's to put the responsibility in the owner's court so that he does something about it before it becomes a problem. That's my understanding of it.
That's why even today, when animals actually do harm the people, whether it's a bull or a dog or whatever, they're killed.
Yep. So this goes on to talk about if a man digs a pit and something falls in the pit, who's responsible? The man who dug the pit is. And maybe he didn't intend for his neighbor's donkey to fall in there, but it did, and he's the one that created that problem. Therefore, he's the one who's responsible for it. Anything else you want to mention through 21?
No, just be responsible about your stuff is kind of something like that.
All right, now one of the 10 commandments was you shall not steal. And so in chapter 21, he deals some with property that if you do steal someone's sheep or ox or whatever, then if you're caught, you have to pay it back. And what else?
Plus some.
Plus some. Yeah, plus more. Now, if you stole it and you can't give it back because you slaughtered it and ate it, then you have to restore 5 oxen and 4 sheep. If the thief is found, and let's see, hold on, let me drop down here. Where does it talk about if it's found alive? Where? 4. Yeah, if the thief is certainly found, it's found alive in his hand, he shall restore double. And so, and that kind of makes sense. You know, if they steal Fluffy, my pet sheep, and I get it back alive, well, that was a lot of stress that I went through, but I've got Fluffy back, and he also gives another sheep to kind of compensate for my loss. But if he kills Fluffy, he can't give Fluffy back to me. And so it makes sense that if he can't return to me what he took, then the retribution should be even greater. If that makes sense. If somebody's breaking in your house and you kill them, are you found guilty of murder? No. If it's the next morning, and I think the implication is here is you track them down and kill them, you are guilty. You are guilty. So there's a difference there. Yes, that's right. That's called vengeance. That's exactly right. All right. If I let my sheep out and they go over to Lucas's pasture and they eat up all his wheat crop, who's responsible for that? I got to give him the best of my crop and make restitution for that. If I start a fire and it blows over to my neighbor's pasture, burns up his vineyard, who's responsible for that? I am. I have to make restitution for that. What else we got here? There's situations where maybe it's not clear what's really happened here. Maybe Lucas has given me something to borrow and it comes up missing. And did I take it for myself? Did it get stolen while it was at my property? Who's responsible here? And in those cases, they would often have to go before a judge. And they would have to make the case, listen, I don't know what happened to it. I borrowed it, I put it in the barn, and then it just came up missing. And there has to be an understanding of, am I guilty of stealing it, or did something just happen to it in the process? So those type of cases would often have to go before a judge. I don't think we're going to get through the end of 23. I don't think that's going to happen. Anything else you see in that section through verse 15? All right, let's move on here and look at this 16 through 21. That's pretty broad heading. It's just kind of social responsibilities there. And this deals with situations. It starts off with, if a man entices a virgin who's not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If the father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay the money according to the bride price of virgins. And what this is, okay, so here's a man and a woman that are unmarried, and they commit fornication. What's the responsibility of the man at this point who seduced this virgin? Okay, yeah. Now, does it have to be that they get married? Do they have to get married? Yes. Now, and I think the purpose of this is to protect this woman, because there is, first of all, the bride price was not a little thing. Do you remember Jacob's bride price for Rachel? 7 years of labor. Okay, so here's what's under consideration here. If a man entices a virgin and sleeps with her and he says, hey, that was fun, but I'm really not interested in marrying you. What, especially in ancient cultures and in many places in the world today, what has he done to her? He's disgraced her. He's humbled her. She, in many ways, would be considered secondhand property. Her ability to find a husband has been dramatically reduced by this. And so what God is doing is He's saying, listen, if something like that happens, you're not getting out of this without responsibility. And so you have to pay the bride price. And if you want to marry her and the family's in agreement with it, you can pay the bride price and she can become your bride and you can get married. But if the family's not in agreement with it, you still have to pay the bride price. There's responsibility in the action that you've taken here. And so it was a law to protect in that case, so that such actions like this would not be done without any consequence. All right, we're going to have to stop there. We'll come back to that. I'm very sorry that we've taken as long as we have to get through this, and I'll try to chunk it up a little bit more in this next section. But these are the details. Are you sure you want to make a covenant with me? If so, this is what you'll have to do. Thank you for your good attention.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.